Hi guys, welcome to Digital Tech Join. In this video, we will learn about creating a full-fledged module that interacts with database and creates new records, updates, and read and even fetches a record from database using Blazor WebAssembly. So for Blazor, I have already released two videos. I will go to my playlist and here you can see ASP Blazor tutorial. So there is a video on introduction to ASP.NET Blazor and there is a video on Blazor server versus Blazor WebAssembly. So if anybody who have not understood or like to know the basics before starting full-fledged Blazor, I recommend that you watch both these videos and then jump into this third video that I'm creating which deals with database. Okay, so let me show you the demo before we start the hands-on. So here is a Blazor default dashboard. I've created a menu called students. When I click it, I'm able to see the list of records which has a basic roll number, name and standard. Then we are able to add new student. So I'll just add some student over here. I'll add John and this is a roll number and then this is the standard. Okay, so it cannot be 10 standard. Okay, so this is how it gives a message that it's here, and you can see John is added over here, and we can also go ahead and edit it. So this is the way you edit it, and finally you'll be able to also delete this record. So this is what we are going to do it from the scratch in this practical session. So let's jump in the practical session, and I'm going to create this project in Visual Studio 2022 and I'm going to use .NET Framework 6.0. So let's get started. So here in Visual Studio 2022, I'm going to create a project. I'm going to say, and in next template, I'm going to select Blazor WebAssembly. If it's already there in my recent project, if you want to search, just click on search Blazor and you can see Blazor WebAssembly. Click on next, name it. It's a school management project and I click on next. So for now I'm going to select untick configure for HTTPS and make sure that you select ASP.NET Core hosted and click on create. So we have this project default template loaded. Now when I selected core hosted, that means it's created a project template for us and it has created the following three templates. One is the client, which will be a client interface. Since we have selected Blazor WebAssembly, this will be all the Razor component that we are going to create it, which will be downloaded in the client side. And then there will be server where we'll have the web APIs created. We will be using controllers and create a web API. And finally we'll have something called shared where we'll have the model classes, the entity classes. So let's go ahead and first let's create the model class. So I will select on the shared and create a folder called models. Add new folder and then I click on model folder and say create a class, and I'll create a class called student entity. So this is my student entity class and I've already copied the required properties to be defined. This will be public class and I copy this is an ID, so this will be, I'm going to add data annotation key because this will be a primary key. Then I've added student roll number, first name, last name and student standard. So these are the properties that I've defined for which I'm going to create a table in my database. So this is my model class ready over here. Now let's go ahead and set up a server. So in server, first we'll require to enter the connection string. So first I'm going to go ahead and create a database. Right click on, so this basically I've used Microsoft SQL Server Management Express Edition that can be easily downloaded from the internet. So I say school management. So this is my database name and I click on OK. The school management database is created. Now I'll come back to my server project and click on app setting JSON, and here I'm going to enter the connection string. Connection string, and I'm going to name it as default connection, and this is my server, my SQL Express. If you having, you can also go ahead, right click on this and select property and just copy it so that there's no typo error, and you can just paste it over here. So this is my server, and then I'm going to use the database. So my database is school management, and then I'm going to say, I'll just expand this area. Okay, so I'm going to say integrated security is true and trust server certificate is true. So I've defined my connection string. Once I define my connection string, okay, I'll go ahead and create the application DB context class, and right click on my server project right over here, create a folder called data or DAL, data access layer, and I'll right click on that and select the class and name it as application DB contest. Okay, now before we proceed, let me go ahead and right click on the server project and add the required NuGet packages. I click on manage NuGet packages. So I'm going to select core, Microsoft Entity Framework core, I install. Then I'm going to install SQL Server, NuGet package right over here, Entity Framework core.sql server. And then I'm going to install tool. This will be required to use the migration commands. So okay, so here it is, Microsoft Entity Framework core.tools, and I installed that too. So I've installed for following NuGet packages. So you can see I've installed core, SQL Server, and tools. So these are the libraries, NuGet packages required. So once I do, I go back to my DAL and my class application DB context class, and here I'm going to implement DB context. Okay, and I'll just correct this. So show potential error, and it will expect that you should be using. So this is a reference core, and then I click on this, and on your left hand side you can see this option. Click and select application DB context with an option settings. So here we have created this instance. Now we will be injecting the connection string in our program.file. As of now, we'll keep the code as it is. Here I'm going to also define DB set, and I'm going to refer public DB set, and here I'm going to refer my entity class, that is student entity, and this is the name of the table that I want, students. Okay, with this get and set property. So now when I run the migration command, I should be able to create a table in database called students, having the fields defined in my student entity class. These are the fields. Fine, so this is done. So once this is done, what we need to do is that go ahead and create a table in the database. So I'll click on server, and I'll go to the console. So you can go to tools and NuGet package manager console. Yes, here I'm going to define the migration command. So I say add migration, and this is my initial DB setup. I click on enter. There's one thing I missed out. I have not added that necessary settings in the programs. So here I'm supposed to add it. I'm sure there will be error because in your programs I'm supposed to refer that over here, which I have not done. I'll do it right away. So I say builders dot services dot add db contest, and I'm going to refer my application db contest class with options dot use SQL and build dot configuration builder dot configuration dot get connection string, and this is the name of my connection string, default connection. So I had missed this. We need to inject this as I told you. So here I'm going to, so I created in my application db contest class a constructor where from the program.cs I'm going to pass the connection string and open the connection string. So now let's go ahead again and run this command, migration, add migration initial. Yes, so finally our migration folder is created, and you can see the class is also created. Let me go ahead and update the database. So I say update database, and this will actually create the table in the database. Success. And here if you go to the database and you just refresh the database, and you should be able to see the table, school management table, and here you go, we have students table, and we also have the fields that's fine in our class, ID, student, first name, last name, and the standard. So our server is ready now. So our server component is ready with the database. Now let's go ahead and create necessary interface and implementation and the APIs that will be consumed in our client. Okay, so for that, let's create a folder in server called repository. Okay, and I'm going to create one interface. Right click and add new item, and I'm going to select code interface, and I'm going to call it as iStudent. So this is my interface, and this will have the definitions of method that will be created. So following will be the method public so this one student entity, so we are referring a model class over here, student entity, and what this will define a method called getAll. So this will fetch all the students. Now we'll have something called public task, and here we are going to fetch single record. So we are going to pass our student entity, and we are going to say get student details, and this will have parameter called ID. Okay. Now we'll have one more called task. This will be student, and this time it will be not the add student, and we are going to pass entity. So these are the declaration as interface do it, and then we are going to implement that in our class. Secondly, we have an update. Now update will also have an ID, int ID, and finally delete. So I'm going to say Just copy this, paste, and this will be Boolean variable, that is whether it's deleted or not, and say delete student, and this will have only ID, not the entity. Similarly, here also we just want to know whether the update was successful, so we'll have Boolean variable. Okay, so this is done. So we have defined our interface. So this is an interface, and now let's go ahead and create the actual class, that is student, which should implement this interface, which will have the, so let's create a class called student repository. Okay, and this student repository will implement iStudent. So once you implement that, it will throw an error and it asks you to implement all the classes. I say click on show and I say implement interfaces. Right, so this is my main class which has an implementation. Okay, and here I'm going to write the code which will actually fetch the record, update and delete students from the database. Okay, so in order to implement this, let me go ahead and first refer the application DB clause. I say private application DB context. This is an application DB context which you have defined it over here in the DAL layer, and I name it as underscore DB. We don't have a constructor, we need to have a constructor. So I just type CTOR and tap. This is a constructor, and here I'll inject the application DB context and then initiate the underscore DB class. So now database is ready. Now first we'll go to our getAll method, and simply here in the getAll method, what I'm going to do is return await underscore DB dot students. This is the name of the table, to list async. That's it. So this will fetch all the record. Now let's go to our, and this will be an obviously an HTTP verb. So let me also add that HTTP get. Now we go to students, and we are going to do the same thing over here. So, but we need to pass the ID and fetch the particular record. So here I'm going to do something like data and await underscore DB dot students dot first or default async, and I'm going to use lambda expression dot ID custom ID. This will fetch this details for this particular student, and then we are going to return back the data. Here I'm going to use HTTP get, but this time I'm going to use the label so that it is differentiate to get all or get student details. So I say student details. Okay, so it's the same verb HTTP get, but here it's by default. If you do not specify anything, this method will be called. Otherwise, if you specify get student, this method will be called in. Okay, now let's go and add the student. Here is add student. Let me give it a HTTP post, because this will be post method, and I'm going to label it add student. And in add student, I'm going to say object await DB dot students dot add async, and I'm going to pass the variable student as a parameter, and I say DB dot save changes, and I'm going to return obj dot entity. Fine. So this is something I've added new record in the database. Now let us also write code to update this record. So let's go to update method now. Yeah, this is an update method. I'm going to use HTTP post, and here I'm going to use where I think so I'll just able to, before updating we'll have to search whether the record is valid. So we copy this and paste it over here. So we're going to validate if data is not equals to null. Okay, so then we are going to assign data first name equals to student dot first name. This will be last name, roll number and standard. So this will be last name, standard, and this will be roll number. So once we assign the new values, we are going to save it. So we have underscore db dot students dot update, and this is the data, and then finally db dot save changes and return true, since it returns boolean variable. And okay, so here in this case else we say return false. Fine. Okay, so we have not set this to async. We don't also require this. So here is the code that actually updates the record. So we first fetch the record, check whether the record exists. If it exists, it will assign the new values that is passed in this variable, in this parameter, then update the record and save changes and return true. So this is how we do the update. Let's go ahead and also create the delete. So just copy these two lines. This will be required for delete. We go to delete method, and in the delete we add a verb http put, and we say delete student. Okay, and this will be async. Okay, and so first we'll find the record. If it finds the record, it's going to use underscore db dot students dot remove and the data, and then say db dot save changes, and finally it will return true and else return false. It's fine. So this is also ready. So our core implementation class is ready. So this is a core implementation class student, which implements iStudents interface. So we define the variable, then we initiate it through the constructor. Then this is a code that adds the students in the database. This is a code that deletes student from database. Then this is a code that fetches all the records from database and gets student details, which fetches a single record from database, and finally update student, which actually updates the record in database. So now this class is ready for implementation. Now what we need to do is that we need to create a web API which will implement this class, and then the web API will be exposed to in the client interface, where we are going to use the Blazor component and call the APIs to do the operations. So the last thing that we need to do is create an API in the server project. So what we are going to do is that there is a controller class. Right click on the controller, say add controller, select an empty controller, and we will select an empty controller and name it as, you can name it whatever you want to name it, but let's name it as student API or something like that, so that we can simply use that and to create a web API. So here I'm going to use something called, just one second, just empty I'm going to use student API. Okay, so this is a controller. So here is a student API controller. So 1 minute, I think so I have not selected right. I'll just delete this. Sorry. Right click, select add controller, and here I'm supposed to select API, and this will be a API controller. Correct. So here this will be student. So this is my API controller. I'm going to write code over here, and this controller will call the class student, or sorry, not the student but the interface class, and it will perform the operations. So let's go ahead and finish it up with the API code as well. So in the student controller API service, the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to reference the interface class. So this is a public student, and this is a variable that it defined. It doesn't have a controller, so sorry, it doesn't have a constructor. So we first create a constructor, CTOR tap. So this is a constructor, and in this constructor we are going to inject student interface and then initialize over here. So this gets initialized. Now we are using the interface because our interface has all the method requires, which will internally call the main class of student repository and perform the operation. So in a way we are also doing an abstraction of the class. So let's go ahead, and the first method that we are going to create is basically http get, and here we are going to say public async task and list. This will be a student entity, and we name it as get all students. And here we have to simply call our interface, which will say return await underscore student dot get all. So this was the method that we had defined in the interface and implemented that in the student repository class. Let's go ahead and call, also write it for copy this method and paste it. This time we label it as http get. So I'm going to say student details and slash, and this will pass the ID. So I'm going to pass the ID here, and the same I'm going to pass it over here. It's get student details and I say int ID. I'm going to remove this and I say underscore student dot get students details, and I pass ID. So this will fetch the student details. Okay, so this is not list, this is single student. So I'm going to remove this, and this should work. Now I'm going to create method for adding records, which should be, just copy this and paste it here. This will be add student, we don't need the ID here. This will be async task student entity, and this will be add student, and I'm going to pass the student entity, and this will be student. Here I'm going to say underscore student dot add student and student class. So this will pass the student. Similarly, I'm going to use update. So this will be update student slash, and I'm going to pass the ID. This will be update student, and here I'll pass the entity but also pass the ID, and here this will be update student, and this will be passing the IDs as well. Got it. So but there's an error thrown. What is this error about? Let me just check. So public async update student. Okay, so this is, if you remember, a boolean variable, and so I'll pass in this sort set error. So let's copy this, and this time it's not http get, but it is http put for delete, http put for delete, and this will be delete student, and this method will be delete student, and we actually don't need to pass the entity class. Let me check what is the implementation. Let me go to the iStudent class, delete, so it doesn't require entity, it just needs, and I say delete student and the pass ID. So fine. So our web API is ready. You can see our web API class over here. It's implementing the iStudent interface, and then you can see it is calling iStudent interface with all the required methods in the required classes, and I properly defined the HTTP verbs also, so that you it's very clear that why we are calling this and when we need to call this. So our API is ready. So our server side coding is all done, and the last and most important thing that we need to do is that we need to go to the programs and register the service. So registration is must, so we're going to do that. So we'll go to our programs, and just above the DB context we are going to say builder services dot add scoped, and here I'm going to say iStudent comma student repository, and this is a registration that I need to do. Once this is done, we'll just right click on our server project and rebuild it. Everything is ready. Our shared model entity is ready. Our server project is ready. Now it's time to build our client interface to perform all these operations. So let's expand the school management.client app, and here you can see there's already certain Blazor components added. So we will add our first Blazor component called student list. So I right click on the pages and select add Blazor component, and I type student list. So this is our first Blazor component. Make sure that the first word should be capital, like in this case student S is capital, so this is a student Blazor created. Now this will be student register. Okay, this is the title. So let's actually go ahead and add this link in the menu as well. So we go to shared nav menu, and we just replace one of the menu, for example counter, and we just say href slash student list, and this is students. So here I've defined href student list. Let me go to student list Blazor and define the name as given over there. So I say @page and slash student list. Let's run this application and see whether a component is getting, first component is getting loaded. Fine, so our default page is loaded. Here you can see our menu students. So when I click on student, I can say student register. So let's go ahead, go to our project, and here I am going to actually write the main code. So in the code area, I am going to write the following code to fetch the record. So this will be student entity, and I'll call it as student is equal to new student entity. Okay, so this is not able to find the reference. Why? Because I have not added that link over here. So let me go ahead. First reference I'm going to use is using school management dot shared dot models. This is important. Now I'll come back over here and call student entity. Yes, you can see it's been deferred, and this is a variable student. Okay, so this has become student equals new student, and then I'm going to use inject certain libraries that will be required. The first is that since I'm going to call the API, I'm going to use the library HTTP client and name it as underscore HTTP client. Don't need this. Then I'm going to use navigation so I'm going to say inject navigation manager and name it as navigation manager, and finally I'll inject JSRun runtime to use JavaScript if I require to show the pop-ups if required. Okay, so this is because maybe my project is running in the background. I'll just stop that. So this is what our name project, and then yes, the error is gone now. It was running in the background, so fine. So this is a declaration, and then I need to write a method that will actually fetch records when somebody clicks. So for that, what I'm going to do is that protected override async. No, so this one is async task on initiated. It should have come automatically. Let me just check. Protected override on initiated, and this method will be async. So I just add this async task, and here since we are fetching the list of students, it should be a list object, not just an entity. So this is student new list of students. So done. Now here I'm going to call the web API method. So here I'm going to call the web API method. Right, this should be async. Yes, YSC. Okay, so here in this on initialized async method, which is called by default, I'm going to call the web API method, which is in my controller student, and this method, the one which says get all students. So in order to call that, I'm going to use the code where response await HTTP client, the one which we defined above, dot get async, and here I'm going to say API slash the controller name. So this will by default call the get method defined in my service. If you go to the service student controller, here you can see the route API slash controller. and by default I've done that only, API and just controller name. And since it is get, by default it will call this method. Okay, so this is how we call a web API in Blazor, sorry. And now once the response is initiated, I'm going to ensure response dot ensure success status code, and then I'll define a, so here is a student variable that I've defined. Okay, and here I'm going to pass response dot content dot read from JSON async student entity. This is how you give this to path to this variable defined. And now our HTML or Blazor code component that we will define over here will actually loop into this student entity and display the record. So for that we will do one thing. We will copy. I've created the Blazor code which is there in my VS Code. So here's the code, HTML code. I'll explain that. I'll just copy this. It's a simple code that iterates the object and displays the record. Just copy that, and in above the code section I paste that over here. So this is not person list, this is actually student. I've defined a different name, so let me just replace that everywhere. Okay, so I defined, here is the code. I have created a div method and I say students register. I check whether this student object which is defined as null. If it is not null, I define this table, bootstraps table method, and then I create the headers, roll number, name, standard. There is no email and mobile, so just remove this roll number, name, and just increase the size of this also. Okay, roll number, name, and standard. And here you can say roll number, and this is a name, and this is standard. So I'm going to remove this. So I have 3 columns: student, name, and standard, and then option to edit and delete. Okay, this Blazor component we have not created yet, we'll create. And then finally we have something called add new button over here, which will on click call the go to add new student controller Blazor components. That method I'm going to write it over here. Just copy that. Okay, so just come over here and then define void copy this method, and here I'm going to use the navigation manager. Navigation manager dot navigate to, and I'm going to add student. So this add student component is still not created. We will create that, but let us now, this code is ready. So let's run this code and see the records. Records is not there, but let us check whether there is any error in this code that fetches the record and displays in our Blazor component student list. Otherwise we will just go ahead and create one record in the backend. We'll just insert a script. So here is student management, and so I'll just create a script over here and insert some record. New query connection, and here I'm going to say insert into students and this is the value. So I say student role, first name, last name, and student standard, and I'm going to add the values. So I say roll number is 1, name John D, and then this is standard 10. So this is a value. I'll insert this. It's got inserted. Now let's go ahead and run the application and see things in action. So project is loaded. I click on student. The moment I click on student, I am not able to see any exception as of now. So our code is working. Let's go to console and see there is no exception, and also we are able to see the record that we added in a database. So our code worked successfully. Let me go ahead and just remove the other menu, the fetch data menu from here, and I go to the client project here, and I go to nav menu, and I just remove this and save it. Also go to our student list and add a breakpoint just to show you how things are working. I keep a breakpoint over here and come back to here, and just if you see the menu is removed without refreshing, and now I just click on the student again, and the moment I click, okay, so it did not load it. Just one second, let me refresh it here. Okay, so click on the continue, and here you can see here the code got called and it got executed. I think so. I just tapped the breakpoint. Let me do it again. Yes, the API, the on initiated async is called the moment the Blazor component is loaded, and I step. So this is an API call. So once the API call is done, there's a response which I get, which is successful, and then finally I read that values over here in this variable, student variable. If you click on student, and you can see items, and here you can see the entire object having the values, and that is returned. Fine. So here we are able to successfully call the API in the Blazor component and load the record. You notice once it's loaded for the first time, the response is very fast. It's tremendously fast because this is WebAssembly and everything is happening at the client side. So let me go ahead and add the functionality to add a new student component. So I will go to pages in the client and add Blazor component for adding new record, and this will be add student. Then I will go ahead and add the Blazor component called update student, and finally add delete student. So these are the Blazor components that I have added, which you will code it. So I'll go to the Blazor and student list, and here you can see that when you click on click, I'm going to go to new student, and here I'm calling add student. So this is a name I defined to this component, Blazor component. Let me go ahead and first do that. So here I say @page / add student. So this is a name I've given to the Blazor component, and I will be adding the required references. So this will be school management dot share dot models, and then I'm going to inject HTTP client, then I'm going to inject navigation manager, and finally I'm going to inject JS. Fine. So these are the required component, and now let me go ahead and write the code first. So here I'm going to use something called student entity, which I need to use, and this will be student new student entity. This won't be a list because we are dealing with single student over here, student entity, and I'm going to create a method called save. Fine. So I'm going to call the API. So where response. So I'm going to call add student method. So it will be await underscore http client dot post as JSON async, and this will be API slash student controller name, and here I'm going to say add student. If you recollect, I had labeled that verb, so I just pass the @ student, which is defined above student entity. This will be @ okay. So this is add student. If you go to our controller, student controller, and here if you see add student, here I defined add student as a label. It's a post method. Okay, so 1 minute. If I go to my student controller, I think so I've missed out. It's not get, it's http post. That's a correction. So come back to my add student Blazor component and say, and this is a method, that is, this is the API that's a called, and once that API is called, I'm going to read that response. So I say student entity, student response, and await response dot content dot read from JSON async, and I passed student entity. Okay, and now I say student response. If it is not null or .id is greater than 0, that means the record got successfully added. If that is the case, I'm going to use the await JS runtime defined above, and I say invoke void async. This will be alert, will be message, and here I'm going to say saved successfully. This will be alert, not message. And then I'm going to navigate, use a navigation manager, and navigate to the student list. So this is a code that will actually save and navigate. Now what we'll do, I've got the HTML code for this too. So let's go to here and copy the HTML codes, Blazor code basically, not the HTML. Come back over here and paste it. So this is simple code I've used. It's basically defining the model, it's binding the model with the controls. So this is a div class. It's a main div class. Within that we have created a div class which is storing the first column, first name, and then input, which is a type text box, and it is binding the student.firstname, and this student.firstname is defined over here. You can see student over here, I have created two buttons. So this is how I use a similar code for first name, last name, roll number and standard. Below we have one more row, and here I have defined two buttons. One on click save, which is defined over here, and second on click cancel, which is still not coded. So I'm going to just write that code, which will actually redirect back to our student list. Provide cancel navigation manager dot navigate to student list. So we have defined this method as well. So now the error is gone. So this is a code which will actually add record. Let us go ahead and check this functionality. Yes, this is a project. I click on students. So the moment I click on student, the API is getting called, and I should be able to see the list of a student that currently we have John. I click on add student now. Now you can see the form is loaded. This is a form, and I'm going to enter the name of the student and standard and click on save. So here you can see saved successfully, and you can see Richard is added. So our add method is also working now. Let me add a breakpoint so that you understand the code. We go to the code section, and on the save I click a breakpoint. I come back to this and I say add student. Add a new student. Understand, and click on save. The moment I click on save, here you can see it is initiated. Here I am going to call the API. So once the API is called with the values, I get the response. I check if the response is ID is greater than 0, then I invoke the message and then redirect back to our student listing. As simple as that. Let us quickly do the functionality for edit as well as delete. So here I'll go to the student Blazor component and copy this runtimes. Here I'll click on update. I'll just copy this over here, and instead of add student I'll say update student, and the code over here add student Blazor. I just copy this as well because most of the code will be the same. I just copy it and go to update student and paste it over here. Okay, now we come back to and make the necessary changes in update student. Now if that update student, the Blazor component will expect an ID which will be passed. So I need to make the entry over here. So at the page update student slash, and then I'm going to pass the ID. So this will be the ID. Okay, and this ID is passed from the student list Blazor component. If you go to student list Blazor component, in the Blazor code you can see edit. When you click on the edit, it is passing the reference update student and it is passing the ID. Similarly for delete also it is passing. So we come back to our update student. Here you can see we are giving the option to accept ID. So once that is done, we come back to our code, and here in the code first we define a public variable, public string ID, get and set, and here we define a parameter which is a parameter based. So this Blazor component is expecting a parameter called ID, which we have also declared it over here in the top. Then we define an entity class, which we've already done, and here we have to use the on initiated again. I say protected override on initiated async. Okay, and here I'm going to call the details. So the student, which is defined above, I'm going to say await underscore http dot get from JSON async and student entity, and this will call API slash student details defined in the label and slash, and this is ID. Yeah, this is ID. So this is ID. I'll be able to append it. So I say plus ID. Okay, so this will actually initiate. So on initiated async will actually fetch the details of the student. Okay, and then we are going to use the same save method which I copied from add student, and here I'm going to get the student details. So we are doing this because we want to fill in, pre-populate the values in the controls once user clicks on edit, and then once he clicks on the save, we are going to use the same method over here. Copy that. So we are going to use this one and replace this with this one. Okay, and once the responses come, we are going to use is student details saved and await response. Need this code, await response dot content So guys, this is some issue. It's not get, it is post actually. Post from async. Okay, and post from async, and then so there is student entity and API get. So let me check what is the exception over here. We are going to say HTTP client await underscore HTTP client dot post as JSON sync, and I'm going to call the API student details. Okay, I am using await and I am using async as well. Post as JSON API student. Okay, I got it. So I'm not passing the @student variable which I'm supposed to pass, which is declared over here. So let me just clear the code. So here first I declare a variable. On top of that I declare an ID, which is a parameter base. So once somebody clicks on edit, we will have the value in ID variable, and then on initiated we are going to call it and fetch the details first and show it to the user. Then once user edits and clicks on save, we are going to call this method save, which will actually do a post and post all these values. So once we post it, we are going to complete this code now. I say response dot content dot read from JSON async, and this will be a boolean. Okay, and here I'm going to say if a student is true, we don't need this. We are going to say saved successfully, and we will return it back to our listing page. So this is a code that will do an update. Let's put a breakpoint here, let's put a breakpoint here, and let's now run the application. So we click on student. So once you click on student, there is an API call, and we are able to see. Now what I'm going to do is that click on edit. The moment I say edit, here the page is called, and this will actually fetch the record. Okay, 1 minute. But here I have not added any HTML code, so it will not bind these values. So let me do that first. Let me close this and copy the razor code and come to our update razor, update student, and paste that over here. So this is a code. It is similar to an add, and this now let's run the application. We click on students and we click on edit. We are able to see it's called. When I run the application, I can see the values are getting bind automatically. I'm going to change the standard from 10 to 8 and roll number to 15 and click on save button. So here it is, if you see the object has all the values, and just hit the mouse over there, click here, you can see it's become 8 standard and rule number 15. Now let me pass this and update the record. It's updated, I guess. Yes, it's false. There's some issue. So there is an issue over here. You can see there's an issue. Let us go troubleshoot what is the issue. It is not getting updated. Just remove the breakpoint. Let us go and check the API first. So I go to the controller and I say update. Here I can see update student, which is I've called, and I'm passing ID, and okay, this is supposed to update. Let me go to the definition. Okay, this is, let me go to the implementation over here. This is what it's supposed to call. Let me just run the application. Let us click on student, click on edit. This fetch the record and just change the standard to 5th. Just change it to 7th and click on save. Now when I click here, okay, the error is not, the API is not called over here. Okay, so here is the issue. I can see clearly I have defined the wrong endpoints. So it's API student and this is update student. So let me just now run the application without the breakpoint, and I'm sure it should get updated. Click on student, we click on edit, and we change the roll number this time to 12, standard 7, click on save. No, this error again. Student update student ID. Okay, let me go to the controller, update student ID and student entity HTTP get. It's not HTTP get, it's HTTP post. So there are very basic mistakes by labeling or while calling the HTTP verb, which I have corrected, and hopefully this time it should work. click on edit, put 4 and save button. Yes, it just worked this time, and our API is called and it is successfully updated to 4. You can see roll number 4. Let me edit and change the standard also. 6 standard, and roll number is 23, and I click on save. It got saved. So finally our update is also working. Now finally let's go ahead and complete the code for delete. So let me go to delete component over here. First let me go to update, copy that HTML code. This will be similar. In fact, let me copy all this code, Blazor code. First go to delete student and copy the Blazor code. Here instead of delete student it will be update student, it will be delete student, and I'm passing the ID, and this all remains the same. The error is because I have not defined the entity. So let me just define the entity. Student entity student equals to new student. Okay, so this is defined. So now you should see the error is gone. Okay, the error is gone. Here you need to do one more change. Make sure that this is read only, because we are not giving option to edit it when somebody wants to delete a record. And then we are simply saying h2 and say delete student details question mark. That's it. So just add a br tag. So this is a code. Now let us go to add student or update student record preferably, and here we'll just copy this because even this we have a similar code here too, and we'll copy this till here, delete student, and then paste that. It's already defined, so we don't need to. Okay, here also we are going to fetch it and bind this record in the controller first, and then this is a save. So here this will be delete student. Okay, it will be delete student, and actually I no need to pass this method over there, and it's not, it's put I think, because delete is put, but still I'm getting some error. Let me just check. Student delete, am I expecting? So here expecting some, let me just check delete. So delete is as only one parameter called id in my implementation. Let me check the controller class. Delete also has only one, so there's only one parameter, but in my delete Blazor component it is showing some error. Script put as JSON student, and then this is delete student and plus id. Okay, and then I'm going to read from the JSON, and if it is deleted, I'll say student details deleted successfully. Okay, this is a code which looks correct, but I'm not sure what is this error. Let me just check. No ordered method takes one parameter. Okay, let me pass this component. Student controller is expecting, okay, student component. HTTP put async and student. This is our API, and if you go to our interface, it's also to delete student, and our implementation is also delete student. HTTP delete student. Okay. HTTP put delete student ID. Fine. So here I'm passing only one parameter now, ID. Let us go ahead and also check the code for deletion. Okay, fine. So our code is running here. Let's click on student, and it will fetch the. Here I click on delete. This time I can see it's grayed out, that means read only, and I click on delete button. Okay, so this is a value 3, and I'm able to see that it is got called, but it has an error. Let me just inspect what is that error. Delete student. Here this is an API student called delete student /:3. Oh, sorry, 1, and we're getting some error. Let me just identify what is the error. It's status not found. Okay, so it is not found the URL. Let me just check. So guys, for the delete functionality, I have done couple of changes. There were some issues and mistakes from my end. So let me just show you what I did. So in the student controller API, I had initially put HTTP put, but it should be HTTP delete. That's a basic mistake I did. And then I labeled it as delete student, which was right, and then slash, then I'm passing the ID. This was the only change I did. I did HTTP put. Instead of HTTP put, I did HTTP delete. There was no change done anywhere in the code. And in the delete razor component, I have just replaced HTTP client dot delete async instead of post or put. So I used delete async, and here I am actually with the URL, that is API student delete / I'm passing the ID. This was the only change I did, and let us now debug the application. Fine, so we have loaded our application. We'll click on students, and we should be able to see our 3 students that we had added. So here we are. Now I'm trying to delete the last student, so I click on delete. So I get to see the student details, and now I'm click on save, and then it calls the API, and it is passing the ID as 3. Now if you see, that method was successfully executed over here, and I will also get the response, and you can see it is redirecting back to our students, and here you can see the student is deleted. So once again, I'll just run the project. So I click on student, this is the roll number, and this is 9th standard. I click on save button. I am able to see the message got added. I click on edit, and I change this to 7th standard and roll number to 13. I click on save, it got saved, and finally if I click on delete, and able to delete this as well. So guys, this completes tutorials. I know during the tutorials there was a lot of basic mistakes that I had done it, but I fixed it. I hope you like this video, and I hope now this uncovers the opportunity to develop full stack based application in Blazor. Now we are going to release more such videos on Blazors, so please stay tuned, subscribe my channel, share and like my videos. Please also do share my video and channel link with your friends, family and colleagues, so that we increase our channel and we grow our channel. And thank you very much for your time.